How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then hit that subscribe button. So this is just going to be a quick video that I'm doing in the middle of my finals week, just to talk about some important things that people have been bringing up recently. Simcraft obviously released an update to the just general damage ratings and simulations of all of the DPS classes, and Demon Hunter obviously is not in that great of a spot. Now, I wanted to make this video specifically to talk about some of the issues with Simcraft when calculating Demon Hunter specifically. That way, people will understand that just because Demon Hunter doesn't look that great on Simcraft, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are as bad as a class as it's telling us. So for the people out there that are just looking at these sims and saying DPS bad, class bad, we really need to look further than that and actually see what these sims are telling us. And this is just a disclaimer. I do not think Demon Hunter is a top tier class. I do not think Demon Hunter is a mid to upper tier class right now. I think they are a mid tier class at best to potentially mid lower DPS class in general. I do not, however, think that's because of the class specifically. I think that's more because of the lack of power that we have in the legendary slot and just generally with conduits in general, with the majority of the good conduits being AoE specific already, even though we already have good AoE thresholds. So I would hope that there's just a general buff to like Chaos Strike or something slightly before the raid. That way we could be in a little bit better situation for pure single target situations. But with that being said, I do not believe that we are in the spot that Simcraft is showing us, and I'm just going to talk through some of the reasons why that is the case. The main thing to point out here is Simcraft's fight length is 300 seconds with ranges of 240 seconds up to 360 seconds. So 60-second ranges on both sides. When we think about Demon Hunter specifically, we're the only class that our main damage window is a 4-minute cooldown that lasts 30 seconds, which is obviously Metamorphosis. When we think about a fight range that is 240 seconds to 360 seconds, some portions in that fight range, we actually aren't getting access to Metamorphosis. When we look at Demon Hunter specifically with Metamorphosis, this shows us the average sample actions over the whole range. The amount of actual executions of Metamorphosis, the amount of times that we press Metamorphosis over that range, is 1.9 seconds. And the amount of interval, that the time that it takes to press between each execution, is 250 seconds. So even though Metamorphosis has a 240-second cooldown, there's some weird things happening in the actual simulation that's causing Metamorphosis to have a longer interval than the actual cooldown window. A lot of that is because of Sinful Brand specifically and the way that it calculates Sinful Brand as a whole. When we think about down here, this is the cooldown waste details. This tells us how much time is wasted with the ability up but not being pressed. Sinful Brand's cooldown waste detail is extremely low, so that's just showing the priority that Sinful Brand actually has. Since obviously you're going to be pressing Sinful Brand at the beginning to get that cooldown rolling, you're going to have to wait 8 seconds before you press your first meta, and that's what's causing that 10-second shift. That 10-second shift doesn't really seem like that big of a thing, except when we start to actually see what it's doing. So the full range of the amount of intervals that the test is over is 120 seconds. But since there's a 10-second shift, 1/12 of that portion is not getting access to Metamorphosis when it could potentially have access to Metamorphosis if you weren't playing Sinful Brand. On top of that, when we think about pressing Metamorphosis in general, it may be more advantageous for you to press Metamorphosis first and proc that Sinful Brand, and then have Sinful Brand be on a slightly lower cooldown or slightly higher cooldown because you have to wait 8 seconds for the Metamorphosis Sinful Brand to go off first. There's a lot of interesting rotation things that could potentially be wrong here in Simulation Craft. The next thing to look at here is the maximum waste. The maximum waste of Metamorphosis is 45 seconds. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, how does that even happen? How does Metamorphosis stay up for 45 seconds when we don't press it? And that's because of the way that the profile actually works. So this is the damage profile. Basically how it works is it just goes through each individual action based off of just how they're set up. And when we look at Metamorphosis specifically, this is just a line of C++ here. If not equaled to a few different iterations. So this is like demonic being up and then like pulling for meta, I-beam cooldown. And then this last portion is checking for Venthyr specifically. So if the dot is up, then it's not going to press Metamorphosis. And then this last part, this says, or fight remains is less than 25 seconds. So this basically means if there's less than 25 seconds, they're not pressing meta. So you're not getting access to your second most powerful application of Sinful Brand. The first most powerful is going to be your Metamorphosis while you have Bloodlust up, but the second most powerful is going to be the second Metamorphosis that you press in the fight. However, if you're not pressing the second Metamorphosis in the fight, then you don't have access to that, obviously. So basically what this means is we have the interval of 25 or 250 seconds, and then we have this 25-second window where it's not going to press meta anyway. So this basically extends the amount of time where you're not pressing meta from in that window of 240 seconds all the way up to 275 seconds. And then after 275 seconds, there's still a 5-second window where you're missing out on 5 seconds of Metamorphosis to get the actual full benefit of meta. So realistically, the full damage potential that you're getting from a second meta isn't actually being calculated until 280 seconds of the actual interval. So 40 seconds of the 112 or 120 seconds is a situation where you're doing statistically less damage than you're getting out of your biggest cooldown. So 1/4 of the actual time that is calculated in Simcraft is going to be a scenario where you're not getting the full potential out of Metamorphosis. And of that 1/4, around like 1/5 of that, or of the total, you're not getting access to any portion of that Metamorphosis because of this portion of the actual calculations here. And you're also missing out on the Sinful Brand application of Metamorphosis, which in this point is a massive portion of this build specifically that they're running, with Sinful Brand being 7% of your overall damage. If you had that extra thing, that extra 1/5 of the second most powerful version of Sinful Brand, we're talking about a lot more damage. And that's the biggest thing that I wanted to point out here, is when we actually look at the specific statistics down here, and we look at the statistics and data analysis, and we go to damage, we see a story that makes perfect sense of what's going on here. The minimum is 797,000, with the maximum being 1.3 million. So realistically, a big majority of this low cap that's pushing down the actual DPS numbers are those situations where we're not getting a second meta. So once we get to the point where we're getting closer to this number is probably, this minimum number is probably actually closer to, like, obviously at 240 seconds, we're still not getting access to meta, but like at least 50% of that window, we would be pressing meta every single time in that situation. So it's more than likely that this number is probably significantly higher and probably closer to like either 850,000 to like 900,000, not anywhere near as low as this actually is. So realistically, if we think about that just in general, we're probably going to be pushed up in more to this middle tier portion. I would think that we would at least get to where like Feral Druids are and like Frost Mages are. So that's really what I wanted to point out here, is Simcraft is a great tool if you understand what it's telling you, but it's also a very negative tool if you just use it for its face value. So I hope this video helped and that you guys learned something. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't like the video, F5 refresh, try it again, maybe like it the second time. Have a good one.